unaware his ex-pregnant wife. Just signed a 1B deal, he poured red wine on her at her baby shower. Then her military new husband walked in, saying, "Touch her again and see what happens," left him terrified. He didn't just humiliate her. He poured the entire bottle of champagne on her pregnant belly in front of 50 horrified guests, soaking her white maternity dress until it clung to her like shame, the golden liquid streaming down the curve of life she carried. His replacement's child, the future he'd never be part of, while cameras captured every second of her destruction. "There!" David Reed screamed, his face twisted with a rage so ugly it made children cry and grown men step back. The empty bottle dangled from his shaking hand like a weapon he'd just used. "Now you look exactly like what you are. Trash. You think some baby makes you special? You think that bastard in your belly gives you worth?" Emma Chen stood frozen, champagne dripping from her hair, from her eyelashes, pooling at her feet like liquid humiliation. Her hand flew instinctively to her 7-month pregnant stomach, protecting her daughter from venom her father couldn't shield her from yet. She couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stand there while her past tried to murder her future in front of everyone who'd come to celebrate her new life. The garden erupted in chaos, gasps, screams, the sound of chairs scraping violently against stone as guests lurched to their feet. Phones came up like weapons, recording, documenting, bearing witness to the public execution of a woman who'd already survived this man once. "You are nothing without my family!" David's voice cracked with the kind of desperation that comes from a man watching someone survive without him. He lunged forward, grabbing Emma's wrist so hard she gasped, yanking her close enough that she could smell the whiskey rotting on his breath. "I gave you a name, I gave you a life, and this is how you repay me? By parading around with some desperate military grunt playing dress-up in a house you could never afford?" His fingers dug into her skin. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to send shockwaves of old trauma through her body. Hard enough to make her 26 again, standing in his family's grocery store while he slapped divorce papers on the counter and told her she'd be begging on the streets within a year. "Did you tell him?" David snarled, his face inches from hers, spit flying. "Did you tell your new husband what you really are? That you stole from my family? That you embezzled millions from Reed Holdings?" Tears burned Emma's eyes. Not from his words, but from the crushing realization that even now, even after everything, he could still make her feel small, could still reach into her chest and squeeze until she couldn't breathe. "Let go of me," she whispered, hating how her voice shook, hating how her body remembered fear even when her mind knew better. "Not until you." "Admit it!" David screamed directly in her face. "Not until you tell all these people what you are, a gold-digging whore who touch her again." The voice came from behind Emma, low, controlled, wrapped in the kind of lethal calm that makes predators freeze and prey animals remember what real danger sounds like. The garden went silent. Not the silence of shock. The silence of 50 people collectively holding their breath because something terrible and inevitable was about to happen. Emma's heart stuttered. Marcus. She turned, champagne still dripping from her hair, and saw her husband standing in the doorway of their home. Colonel Marcus Chen, 6'3" of pure muscle and military discipline, still in his dress uniform from the Pentagon meeting he'd left early. The afternoon sun caught the ribbons on his chest, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Combat Action Badge, medals that told stories of classified operations and impossible odds and the kind of violence most people only saw in nightmares. But it wasn't the uniform that made David's grip on Emma's wrist go slack. It wasn't the decorated chest or the imposing height or even the hands that had killed enemy combatants in defense of his country. It was his eyes, cold, focused, burning with the controlled fury of a man who'd survived things that broke other people, who'd made life and death decisions in the dark, who knew exactly how fragile the human body was and exactly how many ways it could be broken without leaving marks the cameras would catch. Marcus moved across the lawn with the predatory grace of a big cat, silent despite his size, each step measured with the precision of someone who'd hunted actual enemies through mountains and deserts, each breath controlled like he was lining up a shot. The crowd parted like the Red Sea before Moses, guests stumbling over themselves to get out of his path. He stopped 3 feet from David, close enough to strike, far enough to let the threat sink in like poison, far enough to let David's imagination fill in all the terrible blanks. Marcus's jaw was clenched so tight the muscle jumped, his hands Hands that had cradled Emma through nightmares about David, hands that had held her face while she cried about not being enough, hands that rested on her pregnant belly every night whispering promises to their daughter, were curled into fists at his sides. "And see what happens," Marcus finished, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire garden like a death sentence. "I've ended threats to national security with less hesitation than I'd have ending you, so please, touch my wife again. Give me a reason." David's face drained of all color, white, then green, then gray like a corpse preparing for burial. His hand, the one still gripping Emma's wrist, began to tremble so violently it was visible to everyone watching. The empty champagne bottle slipped from his other hand and hit the grass with a soft thud. That sounded like a gunshot in the terrible silence. Because David Reed had just realized something absolutely terrifying. He'd assaulted a pregnant woman in front of 50 witnesses. He'd grabbed and screamed at the wife of a decorated Special Forces colonel who'd survived combat missions that were still classified. He'd humiliated a woman on camera, in public, at her own baby shower. And her husband, the man currently staring at him like he was calculating exactly which bones to break first, looked perfectly willing to demonstrate what happened when someone threatened his family. David started, his voice cracking like thin ice over deep water. "I didn't. She's lying. She stole from my family. She's just a billionaire," Marcus interrupted quietly. The world stopped spinning. Emma's breath caught. The guests murmured in confusion. David laughed, a broken, desperate, slightly hysterical sound that made him sound unhinged. "What? That's insane. She was a store clerk. She's nothing." Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket with the kind of deliberate calm that made David flinch like it was a loaded weapon. He tapped the screen once, twice, then held it up so everyone could see. On the screen, Emma's professional headshot appeared next to a headline in bold letters that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. Emma Chen, CEO of Chen Defense Technologies, awarded largest Pentagon contract ever given to woman-owned firm. $1.2 billion deal will revolutionize military AI systems worldwide. David's mouth fell open. His eyes went glassy, unfocused, like he was trying to read words in a language that didn't make sense. His entire face collapsed like a building losing its foundation. The phone shook in Marcus's steady hand, not from fear, but from the sheer force of controlled rage he was channeling into keeping himself from doing what every instinct screamed at him to do. "She signed it this morning," Marcus said, his voice still controlled, still quiet, still wrapped in that terrifying calm. "At 9 a.m., the same morning you were sitting in your car outside our property, drinking cheap whiskey and working up the courage to crash her baby shower." Marcus took one deliberate step closer to David, and the temperature in the garden seemed to drop 10 degrees. "She's the mysterious investor who saved Reed's market from bankruptcy," he continued, each word landing like a hammer blow. "Reed Holdings, that's her company. She created it during your marriage, named it after your family because she loved you enough to let you believe you were the hero of your own story." David's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the back of a nearby chair to steady himself, his face cycling through emotions so fast it looked like he was having a seizure. Confusion, disbelief, rage, horror, and finally, the crushing weight of understanding. "She funded your store," Marcus went on, his voice never rising above that controlled whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. "Paid off your family's debts, covered the loans your mother took out, even paid for your college tuition when your father's business was failing. All of it, every single dollar." Emma stood perfectly still, champagne still dripping from her dress, watching her ex-husband's face as the truth destroyed him piece by piece. She should have felt vindicated, triumphant. Instead, she just felt tired, so incredibly tired of this man having any power over her emotions at all. "While you were calling her worthless," Marcus continued, "she was building a technology company that now employs 300 people. While you were sleeping with your accountant in the office she was quietly paying for, she was developing AI systems that will save soldiers' lives. While you were throwing divorce papers at her in front of customers and telling her she'd be begging on the streets, she was signing contracts worth more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes." David's breathing had gone ragged, shallow. His eyes darted around the garden, looking for escape, for allies, for anything that would make this not be real. But all he found were faces staring back at him with disgust, with pity, with a kind of second-hand embarrassment that comes from watching someone destroy themselves in public. "No," David whispered, shaking his head like a child denying he broke something valuable. No, that's not. She can't. His voice rose to a desperate shout. She was nothing, a grocery store clerk who got lucky. I made her. I gave her everything. You gave her nothing, Marcus said, and there was something almost sad in his voice now. Except reasons to leave. Except scars she still has nightmares about. Except years of her life she'll never get back. Emma felt her throat tighten, not from David's words, but from Marcus's, because he was right. She did still have nightmares, still woke up sometimes in their beautiful bedroom, in their safe home, gasping from dreams where she was back in that tiny apartment above the store, listening to David stumble home smelling like Tessa's perfume, bracing herself for whatever casual cruelty he'd deliver that night. Marcus must have sensed her distress because he turned slightly, his eyes finding hers across the space between them. And in that look was everything David had never given her: protection, respect, unconditional love that didn't come with prices or conditions or demands that she make herself smaller to fit his ego. Baby, Marcus said gently, speaking only to her now, the deadly edge gone from his voice. Are you okay? Is the baby okay? Emma nodded, one hand still protectively over her belly where their daughter had gone very still, as if even she could sense the danger in the garden. We're okay, she managed, her voice steadier than she expected. Marcus's shoulders relaxed fractionally. He pulled off his uniform jacket, the one with all those medals, all that proof of his valor, and crossed to Emma in 3 long strides. He wrapped it around her shoulders, covering the champagne-soaked dress, his hands lingering on her arms with infinite gentleness. I've got you, he murmured against her temple, so quietly only she could hear. I've got you, and I'm never letting go. Behind them, David made a sound like a wounded animal. Emma, he choked out, and there was something in his voice now that hadn't been there before. Genuine desperation, the beginning of real understanding. Emma, please, I didn't know, I never... Emma turned to look at him, still wrapped in Marcus's protective embrace, and for the first time in 2 years, she really saw David Reed clearly. Not through the lens of love or hope or the desperate desire to be enough for someone, not through the trauma of what he'd done to her, just saw him. He looked smaller somehow, older. His shirt was wrinkled and stained, his hair was going gray at the temples. His hands shook with what might have been alcohol withdrawal, or just the crushing weight of his own choices catching up to him. This was the man she'd loved so desperately she'd hidden her own success to make him feel important. The man she'd funded in secret, supported in silence, made herself invisible for. And he'd never even noticed she was there. You want to know the saddest part? Emma said quietly, and her voice carried across the silent garden like a confession. I would have told you. About the company, about the money, about all of it. If you'd ever, just once, asked me about my day. If you'd looked at me like I was a person instead of furniture. If you'd treated me like I mattered. Tears streaked down her face, mixing with the champagne, but her voice never wavered. I made myself so small for you, David. So small I almost disappeared. I convinced myself that love meant sacrifice, that if I just gave enough, did enough, erased enough of myself, you'd finally see me. She took a shuddering breath. But you know what I learned? You can't make someone see you if they're determined to look away. And I'm done disappearing. I'm done apologizing for taking up space. I'm done letting you make me feel like I'm nothing. David's face crumpled. Actual tears started running down his cheeks. I loved you, he whispered brokenly. I did love you, Emma. I didn't know how to... You loved the idea of me, Emma corrected gently. The quiet, grateful wife who made you look good, who worked for free in your store, who never challenged you or outshined you or asked for more than you were willing to give. But you never loved me, because you never knew me. She turned back into Marcus's arms, pressing her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent, clean and safe and home. Can we go inside now? She asked softly. I'm tired. The baby's tired. I just want to go home. Of course, Marcus murmured, already guiding her toward the house, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand protectively on her belly. Laura, he called back to Emma's assistant, who stood frozen near the cake table, tears streaming down her face. Call security. Have Mr. Reed escorted off the property and file a police report for assault. Already on it, Laura said, her voice thick with emotion, phone already to her ear. David lurched forward like he was going to follow them. Emma, wait, please. I can fix this. We can talk. Marcus turned, and the look on his face made David stumble backward like he'd been shoved. "If you ever," Marcus said, each word coated in ice, "contact my wife again. If you call her, text her, send her a letter, show up anywhere near her, I will make it my personal mission to ensure you understand the full meaning of the word consequences. Do you understand me?" David opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound came out. He just stood there, champagne bottle at his feet, surrounded by shocked guests and recording phones, watching Emma walk away from him for the second and final time. As Marcus and Emma reached the doorway, one of the guests, an older woman in military dress, started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Then another person joined, and another, until the entire garden erupted in applause, not for the drama, not for the revenge, for Emma, for surviving, for building something beautiful out of the ashes of what David had tried to destroy, for refusing to stay broken. Emma didn't look back. She just leaned into her husband's strength and let him carry her home. An hour later, Emma sat in their bedroom wrapped in Marcus's bathrobe, her hair still damp from the shower that had washed away the champagne, but couldn't quite wash away the memory. The white dress lay crumpled in the corner, ruined, stained, evidence of violence she'd need to give to the police. Marcus knelt in front of her, his large hands resting gently on her knees, his eyes searching her face with the kind of careful attention David had never once given her in 5 years of marriage. "Talk to me," Marcus said softly, his thumbs tracing small circles on her skin. "Are you really okay? Do we need to call the doctor? Check on the baby?" Emma placed her hand over his, feeling the warmth, the steadiness, the absolute safety of his touch. "She's moving," Emma whispered, guiding his hand to her belly where their daughter was doing somersaults like she was trying to reassure them both. "Feel that? She's strong, like her father." Marcus's eyes glistened with tears he refused to let fall. "Like her mother," he corrected fiercely. "Emma, what you did down there, standing up to him, telling your truth, that took more courage than anything I've ever done in combat." "I don't feel courageous," Emma admitted, her own tears finally spilling over now that they were alone, now that she didn't have to be strong in front of witnesses. "I feel stupid. For ever loving him. For wasting 5 years on someone who saw me as an accessory. For making myself so small I almost forgot who I was." She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob building in her chest. "What if our daughter grows up and someone treats her that way? What if she doesn't know she deserves better? What if I can't protect her from men like David?" Marcus shifted, sitting beside her on the bed and pulling her into his arms with infinite gentleness. "Then she'll have a mother," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "who survived hell and built heaven. A mother who will teach her that her value doesn't come from what men think of her, that she can be brilliant and powerful and soft and vulnerable all at the same time. That walking away from people who diminish you isn't weakness, it's the bravest thing you can do." He pressed his hand against Emma's belly, feeling their daughter kick against his palm like she was agreeing with him. "She'll have you, Emma. And that means she'll grow up watching a woman who owns billion-dollar companies and still cries during sad movies, who revolutionizes military technology and still needs reassurance sometimes, who's strong enough to build empires and brave enough to ask for help when she needs it." Marcus tilted Emma's face up to meet his eyes. "She'll never doubt she's extraordinary, because she'll see it in you every single day. And if some idiot ever tries to make her feel small, she'll remember her mother standing in a champagne-soaked dress, telling her abuser exactly who she was, and she'll know she comes from warriors." Emma dissolved into tears then, the good kind, the healing kind, the kind that wash away poison and leave room for new growth. She cried for the girl she'd been at 18, sleeping on bus benches and believing she wasn't worth saving. For the woman at 26 who'd loved David so desperately she'd erased herself trying to earn his affection. For every moment she'd believed his lies about her worth. And she cried with gratitude for the man holding her now, who'd seen her brilliance before her beauty, who celebrated her success instead of feeling threatened by it, who protected her fiercely but never made her feel weak. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Good," Marcus murmured, pressing his lips to her forehead. "Because I love you so much, I'd fight God himself if he tried to hurt you. You're it for me, Emma. You and this little girl. Everything else is just noise." They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, feeling their daughter move between them like a promise of the future they were building together. Downstairs, They could hear Laura directing the catering staff, salvaging what was left of the baby shower, transforming it from a crime scene back into a celebration. Emma's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She almost didn't look, but Marcus reached for it, checking the screen to make sure it wasn't David trying to contact her again. "It's Laura," he said, showing her the message. "She says the video's already gone viral, 20 million views in 2 hours. The comments are," he scrolled, his eyebrows rising, "unanimously on your side. People are calling you a hero." Emma took the phone, reading the messages flooding in. News outlets requesting interviews, women sharing their own stories of leaving abusive relationships, business publications wanting to cover her Pentagon contract, TikTok users dissecting every moment of David's public humiliation with the gleeful precision of armchair psychologists. But one comment made her stop scrolling, made her breath catch in her throat. "I was in an abusive marriage for 12 years, watched this video 3 times, filed for divorce this morning. If she can build a billion-dollar company while her husband called her worthless, I can survive leaving mine. Thank you for showing us what's possible." Emma showed it to Marcus, her hands trembling. "What if," she started, then stopped, the idea too big and fragile to voice without breaking. "What if what?" Marcus prompted gently. "What if my story helps other women leave?" Emma whispered. "What if going through all that hell with David, what if it wasn't just about me? What if it was about showing other people they can survive too?" Marcus smiled, and it was the smile that had made her fall in love with him, full of pride and wonder and absolute faith in her. "Then David Reed did one useful thing in his entire miserable life," he said. "He gave you a story that'll save people. Not because of him, but because of who you chose to become despite him." Emma leaned back against her husband's chest, one hand on her belly, the other scrolling through hundreds of messages from strangers who saw themselves in her story. Women who'd been called worthless and were starting to believe it wasn't true. Men who recognized their own toxic behavior and wanted to change. Young people learning what love should look like versus what abuse disguises itself as. 6 months later, Emma would stand in the Pentagon briefing room with 3-month-old Maya Rose Chen sleeping in a carrier against her chest, presenting the final implementation of her AI defense system to a room full of generals and admirals. Her company would triple in value. Forbes would name her one of the most influential women in technology. She'd be invited to speak at the United Nations about women in STEM fields and the importance of economic independence. But none of that would feel as significant as the messages she'd receive every single day from women who'd watched that video of her standing in a champagne-soaked dress, refusing to be diminished, and found the courage to leave their own Davids. David Reed's last grocery store would close 3 months after the baby shower. Margaret would have to sell the family home to pay off debts Emma's silent investment had been covering for years. Tessa would send exactly 0 sympathy cards, too busy with her Wall Street trader boyfriend to remember the man she'd helped destroy. David would try to contact Emma one final time through a lawyer, asking if she'd consider investing in a new business venture he was planning. Her response, delivered by her legal team, would be exactly 2 words that needed no explanation. Absolutely not. Not out of cruelty. Not out of revenge. Out of clarity. Out of the hard-won understanding that some people will only see your value after they've lost you, and by then, it's too late. Out of the knowledge that she owed him nothing, not her money, not her time, not even her anger. She owed herself everything, and she was finally, beautifully ready to collect. Now, sitting in her bedroom with Marcus's arms around her and their daughter moving beneath her hand, Emma understood something profound. The greatest revenge wasn't destruction. It wasn't watching David lose everything, though he had. It wasn't even the viral video or the billion-dollar contract or the empire she'd built from the ashes of what he'd tried to burn down. The greatest revenge was this, becoming so genuinely happy, so completely whole, so absolutely free that he became irrelevant to her story. Just a footnote in the early chapters, a lesson learned, a bridge burned on the way to something infinitely better. She was Emma Chen now. Billionaire CEO, military wife, soon-to-be mother, woman who'd loved the wrong person and survived it, woman who'd found the right person and bloomed, and she was done looking back. Dear viewers, if this story moved you, if you've ever felt small and found your way back to feeling powerful, if you've survived someone who tried to convince you that you were nothing, Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Let's build a community of survivors, of warriors, of people who refuse to stay broken. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and turn on that notification bell. Because every week we share stories of people who were underestimated, dismissed, destroyed, and who rose anyway. Stories that remind you that your worst chapter doesn't have to be your final one. Hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and in the comments tell us, what would you say to your younger self who didn't know their own worth yet? Let's fill this space with hope, with truth, with proof that survival is possible and thriving is even better. Because you deserve to hear this. You are not what happened to you. You are what you chose to become despite it. Now, subscribe. Your future self will thank you.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment, every detail in the story has brought you emotions, thoughts, and maybe a little joy or motivation. Thank you for spending time with us, and hope that the next stories will continue to accompany you and touch your heart.